So, in 3 months, I'm running a 50K, and I wouldn't really consider myself a runner. I've never done a marathon, I've never done a half marathon, and I've never even done a 10K. I have competed in an Ironman 70.3, though. I got my mileage up tremendously in that training process, but still. And then the knee injury. So, I'm still somewhat recovering from this, but yeah, I tweaked my knee with a minor tear and I'm just now getting back into the swing of things. And so you might be watching this and asking, why is he doing this? So why am I doing this? It's because I'm not just doing this for myself. You see, I've developed this habit of setting these absurdly lofty goals for myself and setting out to achieve them. And you see, part of this is to create momentum to carve my day-to-day around, but another part is to prove to folks that think that things like these are very much impossible are actually very possible. And this time I'm doing this to represent a charity, Cure SMA. And the plan is to fundraise building up to this race and to generate awareness of this disability. So I'm going to tag in my brother Rishabh real quick to talk a little bit more about this condition.
Hi everyone, I'm Rishabh and I'm going to be telling you about my experience with a condition called spinal muscular atrophy, or SMA. So SMA is a genetic disorder that affects the way that the brain communicates with the muscles via things called neurons. So those connections in SMA are weaker and they tend to get progressively weaker over time. So what that means differs from patient to patient, but in a lot of cases, patients with SMA lose the ability to walk gradually, to move their arms around, and even things like breathing, which actually involves the motion of muscles like the diaphragm, also are affected. And so just to give you a little bit of my personal experience with this condition, I was diagnosed when I was 18 months old. Because SMA is a genetic condition, my parents don't have it. So they just noticed that I was a little bit delayed in some of my motor milestones. Like I was crawling and walking, but I always preferred to crawl versus walk. And if I was forced to stand or walk, I would always want to hold on to something. And I slowly lost the ability to do that as well. And so I was diagnosed by a simple genetic test. And the really interesting thing about my story with SMA as it connects to the broader story of SMA is the way that treatment and knowledge of this condition has changed over the short duration of my life, relatively short. So just 5 years before I was born, the gene that causes my condition SMA was identified. So that's amazing to me to think about that. Had I been born just 6 years before then, we wouldn't have even known exactly what's causing the condition. Now, when I was born, we knew what caused it, but there wasn't really much we could do about it. So doctors did really important things like help ensure that I had a wheelchair and accommodations in my home and school so that I could thrive and engage in society and learn and play just like other kids. But there was not much they could do in the way of giving me a medication that could actually slow the progression of the condition. So, as I mentioned, I over time lost the ability to walk and stand. First, I used a manual wheelchair where I would roll myself for some time, then that became too difficult, and I transitioned to the power wheelchair that I use today. But something really amazing happened in 2016, which was that the FDA approved the first ever therapy for spinal muscular atrophy. And since then, we've had not one, but two more treatments for SMA. It's amazing to think there are now literally options. There's a menu of options. The doctors can sit down and discuss with the patients the pros and cons of the different therapy options out there, and there are potentially more in the works. So what do these therapies do? Do they help? Well, actually, if you give these therapies to really young kids shortly after they're diagnosed, hopefully as close to when they're born as possible, the effects are really, I would call them as miraculous. There are children who, otherwise might never be able to walk and might not even be able to breathe properly without the assistance of a ventilator, who are attaining those motor milestones now. They're able to walk or they're able to stand. And even in my case, I started receiving the therapy, when I was already old enough that I lost a lot of function, but it's really slowed down the progression of my condition. So No longer do I go to the doctor every year, and when they measure my muscle function, it used to be they would say, oh, you've declined 10% or 20% from last year. Now we're maintaining it. I've actually made some really important gains, like the ability to hold my neck up, which is how I'm talking to you today. So I want to tell you about something that made all of this advancement, a really amazing advancement in a shorter period of time possible, and that's the Cure SMA Foundation. So Cure SMA is an organization that both supports families with SMA in finding healthcare and supports really important research into spinal muscular atrophy. And so funding from Cure SMA was instrumental in the development of all three of those drugs that I told you about that are currently being used to treat patients with SMA. But going forward, there's a lot more work that needs to be done. We're not at a cure yet. We have definitely made great strides, but the mission of Cure SMA is to support the research community until we get a cure. And so that's why supporting this foundation is so important. You can kind of link to more information about Cure SMA in the comments below it. You can also find out on the website how to contribute to the SMA community. Thank you.
So I'm training hard. And to the voice in my head that doubts me, or anyone else that thinks being prepared for a 50K in 3 months, going from being somewhat injured to actually being able to get across the finish line, watch me. Part of this is the philosophy that the journey is more important than the destination, but in this case, I'm gonna crawl across the destination if I have to. So the first step is getting to be able to do a 5K again, and then slowly I'll build my time back up. And yeah, I'm doing this with a coach. I am doing this with a coach, and it's one of the best guys for it, actually. His name's Kyle, and the dude is a beast, absolute beast. And I'll set his Instagram in the description below. Yeah, check his profile out, and he's one of the best coaches I've ever worked with. And his philosophy behind training to run and training to run crazy distances is less training miles, but doing a lot of work in the gym to kind of build your foundation to help you run further. There will be a link in the description below to the fundraising page for Cure SMA for this race. And yeah, we're gonna run 50K for Cure SMA. So thanks for watching, y'all, and subscribe if you'd like to follow along.